Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for the very nice introduction, and thank you for attending this presentation. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues and my research team, and Lucas Comedy, and who is sitting there, and Sean Allen, and who is on leave, and a few other colleagues. And this study has received great support from the colleagues at the ANZSOG Institute for Governance, and it is undertaken by the Globalisation and Cities Research Program. And this program was established as part of the collaboration between the University of Canberra and the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. So we are growing our research interest linking cities and other important issues like the population, migration, and the economic development. About this study and what's the background of this initiative, and this study, our interest in this study originated or actually were inspired by some colleagues sitting in the audience. And in 2010, and we had the National Urban Policy that identified the three aspirational directions for Australian cities in the future. That is the productivity, sustainability, and livability. And right after this National Urban Policy, and we had the State of Australian Cities report in 2010, 2011, and 2012. The whole study I'm going to present today has been designed on basis of this National Urban Policy Initiative and the National Urban Documents. And we think that we have identified a very important, very useful framework for our policy and to provide guidelines for our cities in the 21st century. And this is a good example how the policymakers and the policy initiatives provide inspirations for academic research and provide imperatives for academics to carry out research. Then I had a conversation with Professor Mark Evans, say, why don't we do some research in this area? Because this is important intellectually. This is also important for policy making, and this is what's more, this is important for strategizing Australian urban future and Australia national competitiveness, innovation, and in an increasingly globalized world. So we feel that following the National Urban Policy Framework, following these reports, we need to provide evidence-based policy making and evidence-based strategies for our city. We feel that we needed to establish a set of indicators and measures and the data that can be utilized to measure our city's progress in a consistent manner. So the aim of this study is to substantiate the policy framework, and I did some literature work, and I noticed that similar studies have been carried out for American cities, for European cities, and for Chinese cities. We simply need a similar study for Australian cities. So that's the initial idea of this project. And this year, and starting from January, we crafted the idea last year, but we started to do the empirical work in this year. And by today, we are able to present some initial findings to consult with or communicate with stakeholders so that we can better understand and inform next step for research and for policy. So we tried to conceptualize our aspirational directions, the productivity, sustainability, and livability under a framework of urban competitiveness built upon the scholarly advancement in this area. And the first question we need to address is how can we situate the three aspirational dimensions under the framework of urban competitiveness? And the first question we need to ask is, do cities really compete? And if yes, how can cities compete? So in the literature, theorists have different opinions on the concept of urban competitiveness, and they are mostly leading theorists in economics and regional and urban development. For example, Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate of economics, he does not accept the concept of urban competitiveness. He thinks that cities don't compete. It is business that competes. Business competes for market and for talents. Well, Michael Porter, the celebrity management professor from Harvard Business School and the author of the reports of national competitiveness, he thinks he's a strong advocate for the concept of competitiveness of business, the concept of competitiveness for nations, and the concept of competitiveness for cities. And the argument is that even though cities do not compete in the same way as business competes, some cities do provide better environment, better attributes that can facilitate business to compete. So we should not approach the concept of urban competitiveness in the same way as we approach the competitiveness of business. And in the past 20 years, there is a growing amount of literature on the concept of urban competitiveness, while in early 1990s, very few journal articles were ever published on this topic. So then, and also in the literature and in the scholarship, there has been a shifting conceptualization of urban competitiveness. And in the very beginning, and the urban competitiveness is approached from economic, in an economic sense. And a city's competitiveness is defined by its capacity is measured by economic success. And then, based upon this concept, scholars developed some methodologies, approaches to measure how can we measure the urban competitiveness. And a common approach is an explanatory approach, and we identify the outcomes and the inputs of urban competitiveness. And this is also the approach adopted in this study I'm going to introduce. That is, the outcomes are the indicators of the urban competitiveness. And the indicators include the progress in GDP, employment, and income, etc., while the input factors are identified as the determinants. They are those attributes of the cities that help enhance a city, the business to compete. For example, they include a productivity, the innovation, and infrastructure. And this remains an economic-centric concept of competitiveness, while some other theorists argue that, okay, the conceptualization of the competitiveness should be more inclusive, should be expanded to include other dimensions such as livability, urban governance, amenities, social cohesion, environmental sustainability, etc. While the recent scholarly argument is that, look, we need an integrative approach towards urban competitiveness, including the dimensions of economic, social, and environmental dimensions. I have to send my congratulations to the colleagues who worked on the national urban policy, who have worked on the state of Australian cities. Your ideas for our national urban policy has been built upon the cutting-edge research outcome in the literature, and they have been utilized to inform the policy making elsewhere, and maybe America, Europe, and China. So so this study actually tries to integrate our policy initiative with the scholarly advancement in this area. So we designed this research following an explanatory approach. We have the inputs and we have the indicators of the competitiveness of our cities, and we also adopt an integrative approach to include the economic, social, and environmental dimensions into the framework of urban competitiveness. So Australian major cities, and you all know that in the state of Australian cities report, 18 Australian major cities have been included. We divided them into 4 different groups based upon the population size, and they scatter around the urban areas in Australia. So they are the cities. They are the objects of our of this study, and based upon the theoretical framework I just explained, we crafted the dimensions and the indicators. What are the indicators? We use the 3 indicators: population growth, employment growth, and income growth, to measure the competitiveness of our cities. In this way, the competitiveness is defined by the capacity of a city to attract population, to attract jobs, and we utilize the income growth to reflect the progress in those service and knowledge and high value added jobs, to try to understand our cities. Then we try to explain our cities' progress in the 3 dimensions of productivity, sustainability, and livability, and under each of them, and we selected a few indicators, and some of the indicators are borrowed from the State of Australian Cities report, and some of the indicators are borrowed from the literature review. So then we try to collect the data from the census data to measure our city's progress in the few dimensions. Next, I'd like to elaborate how we have collected the data. And we are in the transitioning stage from between 2 different statistical geography systems that presented some challenge to all the study of this kind. And to be honest, so we had quite a few rounds of a discussion, and then we decided to follow one approach. This approach also presents some limitations. I will elaborate a bit more. And we utilized we didn't use the old statistical division. We did not use the Greater Capital City Statistical Area either. We used the significant urban area. And for example, for the Sydney region, this is the old statistical division. This is the new Great Capital City Statistical Area, and we utilized the significant urban area. The way why the reason why we use it this way is we would like to have some kind of time series comparison. Okay, this system, the Greater Capital City Statistical Area, presented a challenge or a problem for the time series comparison. So if we use this significant urban area, and for two reasons. One is we can better, we want to capture the urban area in the best way we can. Then under the significant urban area, we find out the local government area covered. Then we collect the data for the local government area covered by the significant urban area to find historical data for comparison. So this is a bit explanation and about our approach. So you would find that some of the data, for example, the total population and the total employment could be a little bit different from the other studies including especially the studies of our capital cities. So we collected the data for the population and for employment and for the income growth. Then we built this index. One challenge of this type of study for Australian cities is that although we have 18 major cities, but the size is so different, and we have big cities, we have small cities. We think that in a way it makes sense to measure our city's progress according to the proportional progress to mitigate the impact of the size of the cities. It is also important for us to divide the cities into different groups depending on their populations. So you would find that Melbourne and Sydney belongs to the largest group. Then we have cities of populations between 1 and 4 million, and then we have cities between 0.2 to 1 million population, and the last group is the smallest city with a population of less than 0.2 million population. And so we can find out the positions of different cities overall, and we can also find out their positions in individual group. And overall, we would find that Perth has the biggest progress in the past, in the intercensual period between 2006 and 2011, and this outcome actually is not surprising for us, given its the economic growth there, driven by the Asian development, Asian import of the mineral and the mining industry there. And in the third group, we have the Canberra and Queanbeyan as the highest, has the highest progress, and overall, and Canberra and Queanbeyan has the fourth position among the 18 Australian major cities. Now let's have a quick look at the different indicators, the city's performance in different indicators. The population growth, and overall, and this population growth is based on the data of place of residence. Then we have the employment growth. This is based on the data of place of work in 2006 and 2011. And we have the income growth to reflect the growth in high-paying job opportunities, to reflect a city's progress in service economy and in knowledge economy. And local Canberrans would be pleased to see that Canberra and Queanbeyan has the largest proportional growth. And in total, actually, there are all the major capital cities have more than 10% of people in the high income bracket in 2011. That is, their income is more than $104,000 per year. They include Canberra, Queanbeyan, Sydney, Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Darwin. And Canberra and Queanbeyan managed to win over Sydney to be the city with the highest proportion of high incomers. Then let's go. I want to go through the different all of the indicators in the different dimensions. It's very hard to measure the productivity that is spatially based, that is territory based. And it's also very hard to measure the factor productivity that is city based. So we used some proxies to measure a city's productivity, especially in the area of human capital or the qualification of the workforce, etc. And we look at indicators like the labor force participation, and we look at the qualifications, the proportions of employees with university above qualifications, and the Canberra and Queanbeyan has the most employee with higher qualifications. And then we think that the capacity of innovation is also very important for productivity. We measure the proportions of employees working in the sectors of research and innovation. And there is a huge advantage of Canberra and Queanbeyan in this indicator. Then we also measure the job opportunities in the knowledge-intensive industries. The knowledge-intensive industries include refer to the so-called advanced producer services, financing, banking, consulting, etc. Then we also measure the proportions of highly skilled occupations classified as the managerial and professional levels. Then we also we measure the digital infrastructure. We collect the data for the household access to broadband internet, and Canberra and Queanbeyan is leading other Australian cities. We then in the dimension of sustainability, we used different indicators. I need to point out that we had some problem with the data collection in this dimension from Australian census data. Ideally, we try to use the census data to make sure they are consistent and to minimize the variation between variables. We collected data from elsewhere for a few indicators in this dimension. And we measure the modes of transport. And we collected data for the proportion of people using public transport, walking, car sharing, or riding to commute. Canberra is actually it's not so bad in this regard, and this data is collected from the Australian Conservation Foundation. And so it presents some variation from the other data collected from census. We collect data for the greenhouse pollution and the water use and the ecological footprint that measures how much land is required to sustain one individual in a city. So the last dimension, we measure our city's performance in livability, cost of living. And we use two indicators to measure the cost of living. One is the proportion of occupied private dwellings paying rent greater than $374 per week. We also use the mortgage to measure the cost of living, and Canberra, Queanbeyan is proud to be the most expensive. So this presents a big challenge to our important issues like our housing affordability and our sustainable development to better strategize Canberra and Queanbeyan's future in the national context and as well of course as well as international context to attract smart people, to retain young people, to study, to live, and to work there so as to enhance our competitiveness. So it's truly, and we would like to, our purpose is that these findings and data can be utilized by policymakers and planners at different levels of government. So we use, we measure the social diversity, and we have two indicators for the social diversity. One is the number of ethnic groups, and a city is more welcoming, is more tolerant of migrants from different cultural backgrounds, and a city has a higher capacity to attract global talents and to attract people from different areas and background. We also use the indicator of the percentage of people who speak a second language in different cities to measure as an indicator of the livability. And we use safety and security. This is an eyesore for the local Canberrans. Why it is so high? I'd like to explain a bit that this indicator takes account all the reported incidents, and on the other hand, it reflects our community culture. We have very low tolerance, or we have zero tolerance of criminal activities. So it's not necessarily an eyesore for the Canberrans. We think that the local cultural and arts activities are also important for a place's livability. We utilize the proportion of people employed in the arts and the culture as a proxy to measure a place's facilities of culture and arts, and we use the we have a measure of the sense of community to have the data of the percentage of people who are involved in the volunteer work. So it seems to me that Canberrans have a very good care of local community involvement and compared to other cities. Okay, I finished running through the different indicators in the 3 dimensions. Next, let's get back to the theoretical framework in the very beginning. The purpose is to try to find out how these performance in the 3 dimensions are related to our city's competitiveness. Are they associated, or they have no relationship at all? So we used some linear relationship for them, and for the urban competitiveness index and the labor force participation, and there is a discernible relationship between these 2 variables, and this is of the variable of productivity. Now let's look at the labor force qualification, and there is also a linear relationship between these 2. And we have a look, let's have a look at the information technology, and there is also a discernible relationship. Now let's have a look at the sustainability, and let's have a look at the transport mode and the urban competitiveness. And overall, there is some trend, some correlation there. And if we look at the greenhouse pollution and urban competitiveness index, you would find that cities that have high index in urban competitiveness tend to have more greenhouse pollution, and then they also tend to have high ecological footprint. And now let's have a look at the more competitive cities tend to have a higher cost of living, and of course, and also there is some relationship between the social diversity defined by migrant groups and the urban competitiveness, and also the capacity of arts and the culture and the urban competitiveness index. So what kind of reflections can we draw from this empirical data? Human capital and connectivity infrastructure are important. By connectivity infrastructure, we talk about the digital infrastructure and also the metropolitan infrastructure. They are crucial for productivity, they are crucial for urban competitiveness. Sustainability remains a challenge for competitiveness. It's a big planning issue, it's a big policy issue, of course, it's a big research issue for us to better understand the relationship between sustainability and competitiveness. And at this stage, the data shows that more competitive cities tended to have higher energy use and have bigger challenges in the area of sustainability. Livability is competitiveness, but livability has a cost. That presents important challenges for policymakers, for planners to work out how to make our cities livable, competitive, and how to provide lower cost of living and more affordable housing for our cities, especially for the talents who work in the post-industrial economy, for the knowledge economy. Next reflection is that Australian urban landscape is different from America's, different from Chinese, different from Europe. And even though we have 18 cities, but the size is so different. We have large and small. Unlike in China, for a city with a 1 million population, that's a small city in Chinese concept, but it's a medium-sized city in Australian concept. That the different sizes of our cities present a challenge for this kind of study. So does size matter for cities? The answer is yes. Critical mass remains important. However, we find some small cities. A good example is Canberra and Queanbeyan, and some regional centers. They are performing better in some indicators. So critical mass remains important. However, increasingly cities compete smartly. Okay? And people compete for smarter people to deliver high quality services and innovation. Okay? So by saying this, I don't mean that the size is not important anymore. I want to provide a different lens for us to understand our cities. And a good case is the Canberra, and it has been my argument is that Canberra is more than the national capital city. Canberra should be a knowledge or innovative hub of Australia. And given and this status is defined by the quality, not the quantity of Canberra. So, and in the globalized world, facilitated by the advancement in technology and by the deregulation of the policy and by the advancement in transport technology so we are linked with the world. digitally. So increasingly, the tyranny of distance and the distance, they remain important, but they are not so important as they were before. So this kind of like new lens requires some smart understanding of our cities, some smart policy making and smart planning for our cities. So there are a few reflections based upon the findings from this research. Next steps. As I explained in the very beginning, this study originated from a call for data, for evidence to inform policy making, but we should continue to find and utilize better data, and this data is consistent. By consistent, I mean this data needed to be geographically consistent and it needed to be temporally consistent so that we can systematically measure, monitor, and predict our city's development so as to better inform the policy making. So, and also another challenge is that how can we make this data and information accessible? Accessible not only for academics, for policymakers, but also for community, whoever who are interested in knowing their local community. So we think that one good way is that we can utilize geographic information system-based visualization tool to enable community access to this kind of study. And we will start some consultation and collaboration with different stakeholders to formulate research agenda. And the design of this study was informed by not by academics, but by policymakers. And there is a requirement from the policymakers. We need more information in this. So the policymakers inform academic researchers to work in this area. So I think that's a good example is our collaboration with the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. We had a very innovative approach, and the policymakers and the research actually work together to formulate the research, and so that we can understand what they need, and they can understand what researchers can do. In order for better policy-based, evidence-based, or research-based policy making, it requires better communication or working together mechanism between different stakeholders, including the researchers and colleagues working for the government, so that the division between the traditional division between the policymakers and the researchers tends to be blurred for given the complexity of the research issues. And we think that we should engage different stakeholders to work together on the methodology and the data collection so that to better inform policy and making. And lastly, a bit advertisement of globalization and the cities research. We are doing research in this area, and our focus is on Australian urban research. Our focus is on Australian cities, so that to better prepare our cities on the global age, so that to better improve our competitiveness of our cities and of Australia as a nation globally. Thank you very much.
Nice. Thank you.